Welcome everyone, thanks everyone for coming. Nice to have you all here. I'd like to start with a few things first before we get kicked off. I'd like to welcome our speakers, Alan, Declan and Martin. Thanks to you all for coming. I'd like to thank Maureen McKinley and Stephanie for organising the venue and helping promote it. I'd like to also welcome, we're live from LinkedIn, we're also live from Instagram Live, and if any of those streams actually start kind of not working, you can go to either LinkedIn or Instagram Live on the back there if it helps. We'll also, thanks to anyone who might be joining us from whatever YouTube or podcasts in the future that this is probably going to be on. So over the next hour or so, I have a list of like easy, some hard, some not so easy questions that'll be thrown at you. But as this is an event for all of the people here, anyone on LinkedIn or Instagram, you can ask the questions wherever you want. People here, just maybe hold it until I check with you guys. We're probably going to do like 15 or 20 minutes each time. I'll come out to you and I'll check what questions you have. So just raise your hand or whatever. I have a number of stickers and markers there as well in a couple of lunch boxes on the seats. So if you want to throw those on, it'll be a bit easier for the introductions later after the discussion is over. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Martin O'Reilly, Alan Molloy and Declan Goodman. Martin, do you want to start with a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Martin O'Reilly and I'm newly an entrepreneur and just moving really into a leadership role with my startup called Output Sports. For the last 6 years I've been working as a researcher in UCD with a focus on biomechanics and wearable sensors, and my expertise was originally in kind of engineering and machine learning, and more recently with commercialising a system that's a one-stop tool for strength conditioning and physiotherapy. And I'm going to be the CEO of the company, so really leadership and the way that you can manage and work with people is becoming of an ever-increasing interest to me. Previously, I guess it was always an interest to me in a sporting context, helping manage some sports teams and working in many sports teams. So there's a lot of parallels that I'm capturing between starting a business and working in a sports environment.
Alan?
Hi, I'm Alan Molloy. Been working in various roles for the last 30 years in technology, primarily in Ireland. About 20 of those have been in leading teams. I'm pretty passionate about building teams that are both high performing and happy. I don't think it's possible to build high performing teams sustainably unless they're happy. I've been involved in doing that with large traditional regulated entities, small startups, right down to the pre-revenue, pre-product market fit stage, and high growth companies in between those two, so lots of varying contexts.
Cool, thank you. Declan?
Hi, I'm Declan Goodman. I've been away for 20 years, so I'm back from overseas. Not today. I've worked in IT since I started my career as a software developer. Lately, the last 15 years I've been consulting, mostly in IT strategy and architecture, but also I got into neuroscience of leadership, which is about using your own performance behavioral preferences to map what you do yourself naturally to your role. So, and I do a lot of advisory and consulting for women in tech and young leaders in tech, because there's a whole shift in how leadership is been delivered, and especially I think the younger leaders have a lot of responsibility to make sure they themselves are in the best position to deliver that type of innovative approach to working better as teams.
Thanks. So I have a couple of questions throughout that. If you connected to us before, or if you've been at one of these before, it might be repetitive, but the answers are usually very different. So I'm going to start with the easiest one. What's your least favourite part about management? We'll start with you, Mark. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, I've been going in this very big transition from being predominantly an engineer and kind of working with data into leading a new startup and a new venture. And it's not so much a frustration, it's just a massive change that you can't spend as much time. Obviously, being an engineer and a data scientist, it really becomes about taking at things at a bigger and smaller picture, but not from the kind of operational and programming side. So I guess it's something to get used to, is that it's now more about looking at systems from a kind of people point of view as opposed to coding and data.
Yeah. Excellent.
One word: politics.
Yeah. that's a good enough answer for us anyways. Yeah. Declan?
Mine is along a similar vein. It's difficult to manage the confrontation you experience when you're really leading change because a lot of people are not too comfortable with change. And as a leader and a manager, you need to drive that change. So the thing I like least about it all is you can often have to do a lot of negotiating, convincing, a little like politics, but that can be quite tiring and exhausting. So it can be slow to get stuff done.
Yeah, and like as you said, it's the hardest part. One of the hardest parts is moving from being a developer into a leadership role. Is there any tips or advice around that makes the transition easier, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me a big one is mentorship. So surrounding myself with people actually that have gone through the similar progression from engineer or a programmer into a leadership role commercially. Really like getting their insights and sitting down and having a big chat is kind of where you learn the most, and then you can take what you've learned there and then basically bring it straight into your day-to-day life. So for me the mentorship would be a huge thing.
And you both on your LinkedIn and everywhere, you're big fans of mentorship, and you are mentors for a lot of people. One of the problems a lot of young people in tech, or anyone really who's trying to move into that role, is finding the right mentors or knowing who to approach. How do you kind of cross that bridge? How do you just pick the person? Or
I'll give you a small little anecdote about that. I worked as a strategy consultant a couple of years ago with a well-known global firm, and they had kicked off a formalised mentorship program and made the mistake of trying to assign mentors. I think that mentorship is kind of like any other form of personal relationship. It has to be emergent. You just notice the spark, you notice that it just happens. I don't think that it can be forced, and I think if it is forced, I ended up being assigned to a guy who I had nothing in common with. We met, and after probably about 5 minutes realised that this was a really, really bad date.
yeah,
And, I never saw him again.
yeah,
But while working with the same organisation, I ended up with people that I'd interacted with on a day-to-day basis who just emerged as mentors who were enthusiastic about mentoring me, and I was enthusiastic as a mentee. And I think that even outside, that's the first time I'd come across it, and from that point on, that's how I perceive mentorship to be, as being something that just happens. And that I think, similar to Declan, when you get to a certain stage, you become enthusiastic offerers of mentoring opportunities when they arise. It just becomes something that is really, really enjoyable to do. It's not a task, it's not an ask from a mentee, it's something that when you see that spark, you just go for it.
yeah. That's one thing that's probably a lot of people would be nervous about asking a person in case they say no, but as you're saying there,
It's a privilege, not an ask.
yeah, Declan, you'll be of the same opinion.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. I sort of describe it as sometimes, that often people are a bit anxious about asking people to be a mentor, to be their mentor. But it is a real privilege to be asked, first of all, to be a mentor. I also think it's important to note, mentors don't have to be old and grey like me, you can be a mentor to anybody, even in a different position. It's not so much, it's more about your, what mentors bring. In my opinion, is so important, is a trusted type counsel to what you're doing. And that takes time to build trust.
Yeah.
And if you haven't built in 5 minutes on a date, then forget it.
Yeah.
It's, you'll know quite earlier on.
Yeah.
One thing I also like to just mention, and this is coaching as well. I do coaching as well as mentoring, and it is worth looking into coaching as a different type angle, because mentors often give you advice on what to do because they've been there, done that, they've had experience. Coaches will often, it's a little different approach. It's more, they will help you look inward in terms of how you're going about doing what you're doing. So I actually encourage a bit of both, which helps.
Yeah, cool. So just speaking, Martin, yourself, so a lot of your working career is based around like researching new technologies and developing ways to improve existing ones in like universities or research centres. Was there a specific reason you took that route instead of going down the conventional working in a big tech company kind of route?
Yeah, it's funny, I've actually never worked in a big company, so I can't really compare both.
Okay.
In my undergraduate degree, I worked in a very small wearable sensors company, and then I kind of just caught the spark to try and take what I was learning there as far as I could. My own passion then was in strength and conditioning and sport, so it kind of happened quite organically. But I guess what really made it interesting is that the more I got into the space, the more research I did, the more gap I kind of saw that there actually is something here that I can pursue with a team ourselves, rather than having to latch on to a big company to do it. And then in doing that, kind of like you just learn so much year on year, and you grow very, very quickly. So I guess that's how I've caught the buzz on it. And it's very hard for me to think of what would have happened if I just went and worked in a large organisation instead.
Yeah. And at what stage did you feel like you were kind of ready to make the big leap with your co-founders?
Yeah, so I guess we have always been very confident in our work, and from a very early stage I started working with my co-founders in an interdisciplinary research context, and we realised we were very productive, and obviously with massive challenges, but we kind of realised we were a great team, and as well as being scientists, we kind of saw that we actually really have a passion behind this and we could sell it. So when we finished our PhDs, it was the clear time that if we're going to do this commercially now, we should seek to do it. So we were lucky enough to get an Enterprise Ireland research commercialisation grant, and then from that day onwards it really became no longer just about the most accurate algorithms and the best system, but how do we now fit this to users and understand them. So that's been our focus since about February last year.
Okay, cool. And that's an example of a team with all the same ideas. If you had a different example of a team with completely different ideas, how do you get cohesion in that team? And you've a lot of experience in that.
And often if you're in a situation, especially as you progress in your career, if you change companies, you can end up taking over a role where it's not greenfield. And it's no different than construction. A greenfield site is much easier to build on than a brownfield site. It's no different from software. And the same exists when it comes to teams. If you take over an existing team, and that team is a team, for example, that requires a turnaround, is such a consulting phrase, right? But if it's a team that you're looking to improve the performance and happiness of that team, then it definitely requires cohesion. And I find that the best way of achieving cohesion is through clarity of purpose. And often there's a root cause for that lack of cohesion, and it can be because of the fact that they've been recently disrupted. They've been bundled together as a result of a big reorg during which you've come into this role. Or it can be that they've just been a team that hasn't got cohesion for a period of time because of the fact that there isn't that clarity of purpose. A lovely simple definition of team that I like is just a group of people that are pursuing a common purpose. It's a much better definition of a team than a group of people that are reporting to the same boss, or any of those sort of definitions. I think especially in a multidisciplinary kind of matrixy world that we live in today, I think having that common purpose is probably the best single way of being able to get cohesion in a team over time.
Yeah, cool. Declan, you'll be...
Yeah, that's nice, that clarity of purpose. I like that phrase. I was going to reach into Eastern philosophy, Lao Tzu, The Art of War. Maybe some of you have read it. But there's something called the way, which is the most important factor to win a war. I'm not saying win a war, but strategy of getting what you want. It's just exactly the same thing. I think bringing everybody to why we're doing what we're doing, not how we're doing it and who's doing what it's. Because if you have the why well understood, then people they'll go way outside their job description to deliver to the unified outcome you're after. And they'll enjoy doing it because they'll see that you're all working together to deliver the same purpose, the same goal.
Yeah. One of the problems a lot of people would have as well, if you're new to, say, a leadership team and you're young or maybe a tiny bit inexperienced compared to some of the other leaders, how do you kind of get them to accept your ideas? How do you kind of make them know that your ideas are worthy of looking at, I suppose, Martin? Or
Yeah, so I think part of it is creating a vision or a shared purpose that you all believe in, and if you don't have that, then it's really going to be hard to do anything productively, because if you can't agree on that, then everything else that's more minor and involved is obviously challenged. So to do that, I think you really have to obviously paint a picture in the near future, but create kind of almost like a series of case studies that demonstrate that vision has a purpose, and then kind of reinforce when you kind of hit the end of those case studies that we're on an exciting journey here, and if we keep this up, then there's something big in the future. So but it is, I think, about, again, kind of that clarity of purpose, and that's what you kind of have to prove when people are challenging you. Like, are you, up to the job as a leader, be it an investor, be it new people that you start to work with, is kind of through your actions and through your work as a team that you demonstrate the kind of journey would be a big thing for me.
Yeah.
So what I would say is it really depends on who you're trying to influence. I've been in situations where the influencing of peers has been as much of a challenge as the influencing of a team. I think you've got an unfair advantage if you're trying to influence a team because you do the performance review. But often a bigger challenge and a bigger hindrance or a bigger constraint is if you're, after joining a team and you've got new ideas, you've been hired because of the fact that you've got new ideas into an organisation, you can often come across as very, very threatening to peers. I was in a situation there a couple of years ago. I think certain people in the audience will know this particular anecdote, but where I joined a team where there's 8 of us reporting to the one boss, and 6 out of those 8 had only ever worked in that one organisation, and each one of them, their tenures was measured in decades. So they had spent more daily interactions with each other than they'd had with their family, siblings, partners, and so they were in effect family. So to come into that sort of a situation where relationship power has got higher, is a higher measure of how you get things done than a meritocracy or any other form of power, is really, really interesting. And the only way of handling that is through warmth, through building relationships and actually one-on-one, actually building up people's trust. It can often be much more important. Certainly facts and being right and being competent is not really relevant in those sort of circumstances. Or having power like you have when you're doing people's reviews. I don't think that's. I think it's more important to actually build trust through warmth.
Yeah, and I think one thing that really adds, that kind of springs to mind, is authenticity. And if you don't have that, then you can't really create the kind of alignment.
Totally agree.
Yeah. I also think, though, one thing that's often overlooked is you should take some time to know yourself better, because you may have a great idea, but how you're going about delivering it, or how you're engaging with people. If you're an introvert, then you might share the idea, say, through an email or through something else. If you're an extrovert, you may say it in front of a group of people when there's politics at play that just won't fly. I think a lot of it's to do with, my recommendation is take a bit of time to understand your own self and how do you best interact with other people. And so if you're trying to bring a new idea to a bunch of people who are mostly introvert or old school, if you will adapt your behaviour a little bit to deliver that up. I think that's something a lot of leadership books, etc., don't really go into. They talk about the external factors, but a lot of it comes from you yourself, and often it's best to wait for the right opportunity to present yourself. Having said that, the organisation's culture should be supportive to not, to encourage you to say whatever you like. But the reality is, as Alan was saying earlier, Martin as well, there's always politics and there's always power within any organisation. So positioning yourself well within that can only serve you for the best outcomes.
Yeah, and leadership isn't all about being a people manager. Like, a lot of people just would not like that position. What other kind of pathways is there into leadership that doesn't involve becoming a manager as such? Start with Martin again.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one for me, because I guess I'm only recently becoming, a leader in a sense. But I guess that's one of the interesting things, that you don't have to intentionally become a leader. If you have a belief and then you put a good team around it and then you start working towards it together, you can authentically move into leadership space. That being said, I think you do have to kind of keep check and kind of, like you say, look at yourself in a reflective sense and look at the people around you and work out, to make this bigger, to make this better, I am going to have to become a good leader. But it doesn't necessarily have to be on the management side. It can be about culture and the type of people you want to put around you, knowing your own weaknesses. So I'm only early stage in that, but it's certainly something that I'm considering, is that it doesn't have to be about you need to do these things 6 hours a day, and or otherwise we're going to fail. It needs to be about creating the right people with a nice vision that can work together effectively. Would be what. So I guess that's a bit more organic for me in that sense.
Yeah, I see leadership as being the ability to influence others, and as I was saying earlier, one way of doing that is through formal line management authority, which gives you an ability to influence others because you're doing a performance review. But there's other ways that you can influence, and there's other ways that you can become recognised either formally or informally as an influencer or as a leader in an organisation. And I found that especially when it comes to, if people are passionate individual contributors who are very, very good at their technical domain, then it's possible to remain being passionate as an individual contributor in your technical domain and be the de facto authority in that, and that provides you with massive influencing authority. And even in large organisations, even if you're not in Martin's situation where you're an entrepreneur and you're actually leading as a founder, even in large organisations you can become a subject matter expert to the extent where you are the go-to person for that. So I wouldn't be afraid of that. It doesn't, to have this status associated with a role, it isn't always recognised as the number of people that are reporting to you.
Yep.
I think it is. There's many routes that don't just involve the number of reports that you have.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, this one's a big one for me because I think there's a lot of confusion in the industry, mixing up terms leadership with management. So they're actually, in my opinion, they're almost orthogonal. I don't really see correlation. Like if in organisations, yes, they give status to management positions and they are seen as leaders. But if we look at what a leader is, I mean, leadership is all about someone you can trust, someone who's competent, someone who has integrity, someone who, you know, can be, in many ways, you can be a technical expert in your field, and you're a leader. People come to you for counsel. You may not be a manager at all, you may not even be a team leader.
Yeah.
And this is why I think this is one of the things that I think you know, organisations, there's only so many management positions in an organisation, and organisations are very successful, and it's not because of all the managers. I mean, yes, good management structure helps. It gives you hygiene. It gives you can remove obstacles and get stuff done. But I mean, you often hear it mixed up, right? You see the best organisations, whatever the Fortune 500 or the best startups, the unicorns, it all came from the leadership. It didn't necessarily come from the top. It's not the board that did it or the CEO or the managers. It's the leadership, which is about taking ownership and being courageous and going out there to try something. And I mean, management has a responsibility to its staff to let them be the best leaders they can be.
Cool.
But I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, very important. And on that note, have we anything from out here? No. Good stuff.
Yeah, sure. I'll
Yes.
ask you a question.
Go for it. Yeah.
So, in my time leading in the technology field, I've noticed that fortunately the trend has been, at least in the States, that the workforce and teams have gotten more and more diverse, and that there's a far greater kind of breadth of representation. But with that come a lot of people who have a lot of different contexts in how to interact, how to work together, how to socialize, what their purpose is. One of the biggest challenges I've had is kind of helping more diverse teams wield that diversity and still have a good clarity of purpose and good team cohesion. How have you kind of worked to overcome that and, you know, milk the benefits out of diversity that we really get from that?
Whichever one of you wants to take that one.
I can start. I think we should do it conversationally and quite informally, if that helps. So, because I know you'll have a lot of international experience on it as well, but I found that Ireland 20 years ago was not diverse. So if you worked in the technology sector in Ireland 20 years ago, you rarely came across anybody from any other nationality in Ireland. And that's only looking on one dimension of diversity being nationality. I worked internationally for a couple of years in organisations. One organisation had a very, very diverse employee base. It had 85 different nationalities working in the office that I was in. And I have to say that I struggled probably in the first year because I was just freaked out. Because I had a lot of learning to do because I hadn't had any exposure at that point. But I think that Ireland has rapidly become like that organisation. So in what feels like a really, really short period of time, you just need to look around the room and you can tell that people are a more diverse group now than if I'd looked around this room 20 years ago in Ireland. And I think that that's an amazing thing. I think that I don't necessarily see that it is a problem other than the role of a leader being to create the conditions for people to thrive. So if you see the role of a leader, very similar actually to what Declan was saying earlier on about the difference between a leader and a manager, I think that people that are in people leadership positions have a duty to ensure that they create the conditions for people to be the best that they can be. And if you hire people that you know are better at what they do than what you can do, and you create the conditions for them to be able to do that, that requires you to have the smarts to recognise the diversity within the team and create the conditions to allow that thriving to take place. I know that's a bit of a vague, abstract answer, but I think the reason it has to be abstract is that it is incredibly context specific, and every single team is different, and there isn't a silver bullet single way of doing it other than adapt as a leader to the team that you have, provide clarity of purpose, and do a lot of listening. That's really what I'd say. I don't know what do you think?
No, I trying to stay out of identity politics as much as possible here, but I actually think it's, I think this, well, I've worked in international cities for many years, so everything compared to Dublin for sure. 20 years ago I grew up here. One thing that I think when people talk about diversity, one advantage I think as a, when it comes to leadership is you may, have the standard diversity, gender diversity, or race diversity, but then you can move into other areas of diversity like qualification diversity. So you can bring people from not just tech backgrounds into your team, and they'd be from marketing or sales or something else, and that allows a whole different perspective of thinking, and I've been there, done that. So I started as a developer, I've been a techie for many years. I sat on the board with, you're talking CXO level. They didn't want to know anything about my technical expertise anymore. They were more interested in other aspects of what I could bring. And then hearing what a CFO, financial person, their perspective on, say, an innovative creation or solution or startup. I'm sure, Martin, you have experience. We have investors sitting in there. They don't even need to know about how your algorithms work. To them, they want to know how do we commercialize it, what's the market, what's the funding, all that. So I think diversity is really important to break down out of the normal realms of diversity and inclusion and bring, I think the qualification's a good one. And that's especially why I'm always interested in young leaders, in youth, not so much the age side of things, but more that bringing the less qualified, the less experienced, I should say, in with the more experienced, because that's where you get balance. That's where you get the best leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then for me, so my company's still very small, but I come from a very large research centre in data analytics, which was fantastically diverse in nationality sense, gender, also really on the discipline side. There's lots of data scientists, psychologists, clinicians, and to me, like when it started about 6 years ago, there'd be like events where we all had to go to somewhere in the country and present posters and get to know each other, and I found that wasn't particularly effective in creating like organic kind of relationships that encourage collaboration or kind of alignment, but it was the more kind of natural things. So like when we all started to go for lunch together or play a bit of sport when it was sunny, or go to the pub on a Friday, that we started to get on really well, learn more about each other's differences and how they could be really constructive. And then when you go back to the research environment, I found that was more useful than like kind of like forced kind of. But that's only one personal experience.
Yeah, that leads us to one of the phrases one of our speakers told us before. It was that the culture eats strategy for breakfast. So like, how do you harness a good culture in the workplace? That kind of matches up with that a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that phrase, and that's why you see so often a lot of strategy work consultants come in and they do a lot of strategic analysis, workshopping, etc. And 2-3 years later, it becomes shelfware because culture wasn't ready. And I think there's a change now starting to happen where they're seeing culture is the true enabler of change. But the problem with culture is it tends to be deeply embedded into like large organisations,
Yeah.
government,
Yeah.
and so that's where leadership, there's responsibility on leadership to try to break out of that.
Yeah.
And that's not easy though, right? Because you have management structures as well that live by the culture. So I mean that's where maybe things like diversity is fantastic for that, but also it's more putting the emphasis on leadership rather than management, because leadership breaks down the boundaries of culture. It can, if management at least step back a little bit and give it the space it needs.
One of the questions I tend to ask a lot, because again everyone has different answers, is what's your we'll start with Martin. If you were doing an interview, what's the trait you look for most in a future employee?
Yeah, no, I really like this question. I'm hiring at the moment. What happens that I find is you can be interviewing someone and they start talking really proficiently about what they do with a massive amount of passion, and then they kind of demonstrate that they've been proactive to learn beyond their kind of traditional remit, and it kind of just happens naturally if they start talking about things they've done. So for instance, I was talking to a front-end developer recently, and she was saying I've got this website where I teach people how to use React Native, and then it was like really productive, and she was really passionate, and then it was really, really good stuff. So it's like the combination of like passion, willingness to learn, and then kind of going above and beyond about that, and it just kind of happens naturally in some people, and if you see that, you kind of I really want to bring this person into my team.
So I look for integrity probably more than anything. I think that while you could argue that the skills to do the job is a kind of a hygiene factor that you do actually qualify people out on, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is qualified in, because there's no way that you qualify somebody in that's going to have a negative disruptive effect on the team. And I find that people being genuine, authentic, having integrity, those sort of words, I think is really, really important for being able to build that team cohesion. So that's probably the one that I wouldn't compromise on. I think other things you can fix.
Yeah.
But you can't fix. That's something that you're born with.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a really good one for me as well. I had to do a whole load of recruitment similar to yourself, Mark. Well, good luck with your journey. It's a bit different these days though, it's more digital. But one thing that I find, first of all, it's incredibly frustrating when people look so great on paper, but when you meet them, it's a big gap. That's just, it's a crime. I think there should be some legislation out against that. There just should be. I mean, come on, seriously. But now, I mean, it's a little different, right? As you move up into leadership, it's more networking and stuff. But one of the things that I like to do, and I worked with an exceptionally good HR consultant years ago. We were transforming the organisation. We had to basically rebuild IT from scratch. There was a lot of churn. It wasn't a pleasant thing. But she introduced me, and I worked with a coach as well, and she was a psychologist, neuroscience. But one of the questions we asked, well, there's 3 questions. So you're going to get the usual template answers if you ask the usual questions, which is important to do. It's a hygiene, right? So look for the passion, the aptitude, look for the energy. Yeah. But then I like to go outside the boundaries and ask them questions that will tell you a little bit more, I think, about them as a person. So a really troublesome question would be, we all make mistakes. Tell us a time when you did something wrong and how did you respond to it? Often they're not expecting that kind of question, but you can learn because it gives you insights into their own sense of self-awareness. And I mean, often the best way is to prepare and give them this question before the interview, which is nice. Preparation always gives them a bit of time. But then there's other kind of, you see, this is the thing with interviewing. There's a kind of an expectation set already going into the interview. A lot of it has to be formal. We have to be, people. So often the only way to, in my experience, to find out, a little bit more about how that person interviewing would be a good fit for your organisation, and you have to be a good fit for them as well, is to ask them some of those out of bounds type questions. Mistakes, how did you deal with it? Or you can often ask them, if I was to ask your last team of workmates, your current team, would you not in the room, what would they say about you? Stuff like that, just raise a little bit about self-awareness, because it tends to be not a scripted answer, and it gives you immediately insights into authenticity or integrity of the person. and what kind of self-knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, they're good answers. Thanks for
there's
that.
some stares at that one when I asked that question, and it can actually get a little bit confronting for some, right? But what you do is you sit there and you just have to be patient, because some of them can take like a whole minute to think about the answer to it, because they have to think. I wasn't expecting to be asked about what mistakes I made.
Yeah.
But actually, that gives you a lot of insight into how did they do it, you know. So it's just a tip.
And from the other side of the interview table, then, from someone who's trying to find new jobs, like there's a lot of jobs out there these days that people are trying to find the right ones, the right fit. One of our speakers before, she said one of her tricks, she worked in HR, so she knew all the tricks around it. She said that what she did was she'd go maybe 15-20 minutes early for an interview, sit in the reception and kind of get a gauge of how people act around reception. How are they friendly towards the receptionist? Do people hang out? That kind of gave her an idea around the office, what it was like. Is there any other ways you use when you're moving companies or trying to figure out?
I think winning in an interview is only one part of it. I think interviews should be bi-directional. That might sound arrogant, but I do think that what's most important out of it is that you discover whether there's a fit. So I wouldn't be afraid, without trying to sound too arrogant on this, I wouldn't be afraid of considering interviews as being you interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. Now, I'm not saying that you go in with that sort of attitude, right, or anything like that, but what I am saying that what you want to come out of it is that you have a decision to make as much as the organisation has the decision to make. Because there's nothing worse than winning and thinking this is great and then joining the company and realising that it's not a fit. So I just say to be careful and make sure that your selection, both to who you apply to, but also in the interactions that you have, because you're not going to really know. I mean, probably the biggest deciding factor for me personally in the years is boss, peers, and team. It's the people interactions, the face-to-face interactions that you have during that journey has probably been the most critical factor onto how successful it's going to be. So I'd say that the biggest prep is making sure that that's what you're testing for. You know, it's making sure that you're evaluating, do I want to work with these people? Will I enjoy working here? Is this something that I'll find stimulating and that where I think I'll be able to have an impact? It's those sort of personal, very, very individual questions. Maybe the sort of things I would say.
That's really, that's a really nice way of summarising it. One thing I do say to people is you'll never make a hard decision if you know what your values are. And when you're going to apply for a job, you should know what your values are. And does that company fit with your values? And you can ask them in the interview. I mean, most good interviewers, they should at least have the answer to that. And if they don't, well, that says a lot. What it does. So, like, for example, and also I think self-knowledge, knowing yourself. So if you're an introvert, you're an introvert. There's nothing wrong with introverts. So if you're going to go and work for an event company who expects you to go up, or push yourself into extrovert, well, at least know that about yourself. So that might screen what jobs you apply for. But then within that, okay, so you're now in the interview. Well, it's your opportunity, and I think it's a responsibility of self to do that. Otherwise, what are you taking the job for? Because what? Because they chose you. It's as much about you choosing them. And if you ask those kind of questions, you can ask for things like, you can say to them, how do you support, certain types of, you could ask them what their management style is, or you could ask them a few questions, but it has to map back to your values. So you're given the opportunity. And if you know that, you prefer to work in teams, you like to be customer facing, you're social, that excites you, that's me. Or if you prefer to work in quality assurance because to you it's about certainty, you like to need a big team, you're happy to work with the data, then you should go into the interview knowing those things about yourself and then challenge the interview panel to say how, what kind of environment, ask your questions around that. It's the most important question in an interview, is when they say to you, what questions do you have? And so many people miss that opportunity.
Yeah, don't see that question as a test for them evaluating you, see that as an opportunity.
Yeah, and it's about taking self-responsibility, right? Like, do you want to go through your career, accidentally going from jobs to jobs, leaving it to chance that if they choose you, you're working there? Well, they chose you, right? They're going to choose somebody. You're as good as the next person coming in, if not better. So what can, qualifications, skill sets, they can be learned. It's more, imagine yourself, and how I'd recommend it, I often do this, is write down your ideal nirvana job, just write it down. And then push yourself, you have to do a bit of thinking and research. What kind of different work environments have you found you enjoy working in, what kind don't? Do you want to work for a financial services company? Or are you more social oriented? What is your gig? What excites you? Because that's what gives people purpose, clarity of purpose.
Yeah.
And most people, when you reach into the middle of their career, you know, that's why they end up, you know, working in places where people might say, well, you could earn so much more money, you could be a consultant, you could do this and do that, but no, it's because they're working to their purpose. They might be working in social, working for charities, whatever it is. But you know, my point is, the problem with that is people leave that often too late in their career to find out. And that's why they wasted 20 years of a career they didn't really enjoy. And there's nothing stopping you doing it right now.
Yeah, thanks. That's good, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much experience on the interviewee side of the table, but I kind of think it's really important what they're saying. It's about finding a mutual fit. So if you're in an interview and you're asking questions that are important to you and you're getting a cold response from an interviewer, you found out what you could have found out 2 years later or immediately after, and that's the most important thing to find out. And as an employer, you know, you're really thinking more about the team and what they can do together rather than is this the best person's grades and what will they are they the best coder today. It's how will they join our culture.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm not saying, you know, move away from competency. I mean, competency has to be there and the passion has to be there, right? But you know, you will get a good pool of resources because you know it's especially startups as well. I think it's the other aspects that you want to draw out of the employer to make sure they're the right fit for you.
And Martin, you're just kind of moving into the whole leadership circle now, so it's probably fresh in your memory. What's the more common mistakes you've been making or people would make when they're moving into leadership for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of hard sometimes to reflect on that. Certainly things that you realise is that you kind of have to make sure that even though it's really complex and day to day you're taking in a lot of information, is that you do create like simple things that you can almost look up on the wall in your mind and say, is this those two things that is currently what's important to our team and our strategy, and is everything else we're doing aligning with that? Sometimes you go too much into trying to understand everything at a really deep level, and then you can sort of get distracted and inefficient or non-productive. So for me, that's probably the biggest learning already, is like to make sure you know what like the main things you're trying to do and represent there, and to make sure that everything you do as a team and as a culture represents that. There's, you know, that can come into so many aspects of day to day, but that'll probably be my biggest thing. Like, I love getting involved in stuff. I love tech, I love sport, I love all of it, but sometimes I've got to just go, okay, no, that's not important right now. That's probably most important.
Cool. So for the two guys over here, more specifically in this one, you've worked in tech for quite a while now, and especially probably through the dot-com bubble and the likes of that. Regardless of the advancements in technology, is there anything about leadership back then that's the exact same as it is now?
All?
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
I think an awful lot of it is pretty timeless. I think there's definitely things that you can do now that you couldn't do before, just because of, you know, the fact that there's an awful lot more processing power available now, and the fact that, you know, infrastructure has become a commodity and so on. The fact that practices have changed very, very dramatically from 2005-ish onwards, you know, with the shift towards shorter cycle times and lean coming on after that. I think that while those things have been different, I think that if you came across a really, really good leader in the 1960s and put them into today's context, they would be a really, really good leader. Deming, you know? So, and he's like only just one example, I mean, you know, but you could take lots of others as well, and their stuff is pretty timeless. So I don't think it's massively changed. I think there's as much difference between one organisation and another organisation in terms of context as there is taking one decade and another decade. You know, I think that what it requires is adaptable people with very good values, applying that raw DNA to whatever problem is in front of them in that context. And I think that that's pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think along that vein as well, like we have a lot of, it comes back to what does it mean to be a good leader and what is leadership about. And you can have great leaders. If you look at some of the most successful businessmen and women around the world, you know, they often move in and out of different industries completely. They lead in tech, they lead in marketing, sales, they move humanitarian, and you ask yourself, well, you know, they don't have to know, often you don't even have to know a great amount about the domain. I was just saying earlier as we were sitting down, Steve Jobs himself said it, right? He said, why would you hire smart people and then tell them what to do? And he said he was ahead of his time. I mean, but that's why Apple was created. There's a good example.
Yeah.
You're a startup, right? If you had Steve Jobs, whether he was into, he may not be into your area, although you're a bit of tech, but even if it wasn't tech, wouldn't you want him as a mentor, someone to, because of his attitude? He's like, we don't need, a leader tends to give away more than they retain. I mean, that's what good leadership really is. It's about trusting others and empowering others to come up with the solutions. Come on, because Steve Jobs didn't come up with all the solutions, right? He introduced the initial concepts, gave the framework, and he hired smart people to build this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
It's about change. You know, we can't do it all ourselves. There was one other thing around that. What was the question again? Sorry, the question. There was something else in the question I liked. Mistake? No. What was it about the leadership? You asked. Yeah.
Yeah. I've forgotten now.
What exactly?
What's
The advancement.
What's changed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I do think, however, that with tech, there's a massive expectation now with young leaders, and especially in tech, for transparency. Everything's become transparent. Our lives have become transparent. I was actually saying to Alan that having a drink earlier. Have you seen the building across the road? I mean, you can see into the people's desks. You can actually read their screens. I mean, literally, transparency is the new. I think it's a bit of a. I think it's very healthy. But as a leader today, you know, like there was a time when leadership, a lot of it, decisions and all that was behind closed doors, and people held on to the information. Now it's actually give it away and it's transparent. So I do think that's different. I don't think that's going to impact, you know, I think the same quality is there, expected. But there is a slight different type of, like, you know, there's less patience these days. So, especially in tech, if you're going to build a prototype, you don't ask for 12 months budget to build a prototype. I mean, or 6 months budget. You don't even ask for a team of 20 people. Back in the day, there were big teams set up because the methodology, waterfall. Now we have lean, agile. We even have other concepts around methodologies. So I think things are. I think there's higher expectations to get outcomes faster in leadership today, and that's why some of the slower, massive companies have lost the game. Right? We've seen this, the big corporates, and I think they're still going to lose the game. And that's what gives way to the unicorns and the disruptors, right?
Yeah.
Because they just come in with a completely different mindset. But that I think is different. So yeah, but I have forgotten the questions.
Yeah, no worries. So just going to check here again. Has anyone anything else?
Yeah. One quick question. Yeah, go ahead. The thing is, in terms of, you can say around conflict management, as a young tech leader, if you can say around two very, very smart people and they are like in conflict with one of the idea, and you think it's like every idea is, you can say around, as a leader, it's, you can say around making the vision count and making the vision count. But the thing is like how you take that decision and how you resolve that conflict in that situation. If you oblige that, yeah, it's like this idea is also good, this idea is also good, and how that conflict management works around. So yeah, that's a critical challenge.
Conflict management, yeah. That's one I struggled with for many years. I just couldn't do it. I was too agreeable. And so when I tried to lead and get change done, you know, I'd have a smart idea, yeah, but someone else would have a smart idea. But because there's pushback and you have to convince it, at times I would say, okay, well, what's the easiest path? And that's why with leadership you have to kind of, if that's one of your traits, you kind of have to work on that and become less agreeable to become a good leader, no matter what. Because I mean, otherwise you're going to always, you know, be influenced when, for the sake of, it's too hard. That's one aspect. If it's not to do with that personal trait and it's more to do with, you know, two experts, different point of views, I would go back to the outcome. And so if you can achieve the same outcome, then it just comes down to, at 100,000 feet from an outcome perspective, doesn't matter how we do it. And it tends to not matter. unless there's certain, so now you have to go back to, well, what makes it the right way or the wrong way to do it? And that comes back to, well, what are the principles we're working to, and what are the values we're working to? And so often you have people disagreeing, but they're actually disagreeing about the same outcome. And so that leads, you get stuck into stalemate, right? Whereas if they turn around and say, well, hang on, let's put the outcome aside. What about the disagreement is it that we're not, aligning on? And that often comes back to principles. It might even be things around, speed of delivery, or it could be interpersonal aspect, could be cultural. But that's where you have to break down that confrontation down to, well, take the two people's different opposing views out of it and look at, well, what is the, what is it that we're aligning on, probably 90%, and it's probably a small 10% part of it that the two people or the team didn't realise was causing the bottleneck.
Lads,
Sure of that.
do you want to pitch in on that one?
Yeah, it's very, very depends on the conflict. It depends on the specific situation, and so it's how you deal with it really comes down to judgment as a leader. I think if it was a pure technical, one idea or method being debated versus another between two technical staff, and there was no other aspect to it at all related to personalities or people or any of those sort of things, then that often ends up being due to local optimization. I often find that that's what it is, and I would absolutely mirror what Declan said, that a lot of it is to do with, a lot of it is solved through reverting back up a level through to principles and values and what the company outcomes are that you're trying to deal with. And I think that being a leader often means that you can't remain being everybody's best friend, and that often means that you have to actually apply judgment. It often feels to a certain way, in a certain way, like having to be that kind of benevolent dictator type, that kind of monarchy type, where you have to carry the pen. I think that one of the things with great power comes great responsibility, that old cliche that at the end of the day you need to resolve it because you need the team to be happy and excellent, like I started the conversation. So I think in order for that to be done, you have to make the call. And with that comes some consequences and some trade-offs, but that's actually one of the both least enjoyable and most enjoyable parts of the job at the same time. I know that sounds like complete dissonance, but that is what the job is how am I going to deal with this so that it has the best outcome?
Yeah, because they end up saying the same thing, like when you hire me, you always say this, like, we hire smart people so that they can tell us what to do and your ideas will be listened. And what's now, it's like at the time of conflict, I need my idea to be listened as well, I need my idea to be listened as well, because you as a leader promised me when I joined that particular team that yeah, my ideas will be valued, and how you are keeping that promise at that moment, it also...
And I think one of the biggest cultural shifts that's happened, going back to the previous question around what's changed in the last few decades, I think one of the biggest cultural changes that's happened in the last few decades is while there's been some niche movements towards holacracies in the last while, where you've got teams where all the decision making is fully distributed right down to the individual. I think what has emerged as probably the most powerful change in behaviour among teams has been team-based decision making. One of the things that I've found myself in certain times of conflict, where the conflict isn't just purely technical, but it may be personality related as well, and I've probably learned this more through being a parent than anything else. There's a lot that I've learned through being a parent that applies, where sometimes you end up saying, sort it out and come back to me. And I need you to be here at 9 p.m. and tell me what the answer is. Usually with a lot more expletives involved in how
Although
sometimes you
have to be that direct.
But it depends. A lot of it is the judgment though as to, is that cruel? And is it like unnecessarily cruel? So I think as a leader you have to decide whether or not to go with that approach where you actually go and say, get on with it and come back to me, or whether or not you need to actually go and make a call on it in the best interest of the greater good, or whether or not you need to go one-on-one. I think it all comes down to judgment. So the treatment strategy for it is very specific. That is the job, is to actually go and say, this is how I'm going to play this one. there isn't a silver bullet on that one. It's a great question because that's the essence of leadership. So it's a wonderful question. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Really good one.
And I just have to add to this. It's about self-knowledge, right? So you can lead, and you have in the animal kingdom, you may have read about this, you have the gorilla approach to leadership. There's a silverback, stay out of his way. Or there's the chimpanzee approach to leadership, which is about team. It's very, it's diluted, it's across. One thing that's really important here is that if you know yourself well enough, you begin to spot which kind of leader you are. And unfortunately, in leadership, you have to sometimes be the silverback and say, this is just how it is. And if I'm accountable, I'm head of this department, or if I'm leading this, it's my decision. You take responsibility, but you have to say this is how it is. Or else, at other times, you have to lead by consensus, which is the chimpanzee approach of bring everybody on the journey, convince them all. You'll end up being as good at debating as Plato was. You take that approach. But it is important, because no matter what, there is no, it's a spectrum, leadership, right? And at times you can see, different contexts, as Alan was saying, different contexts. Sometimes you have to lead. I don't mean be disrespectful or forceful or anything, but sometimes, often I do ask the question, if you're challenged and someone's not sure what to do, I do turn around and say to them, well, who's responsible and who's accountable? They're very different things. And accountability tends to get a lot of heat. So no matter how good your team is, whatever they do, if you're head off, if you're accountable for an outcome, then you're often, if things get a little bit, confrontational, whatever, well, you're the one who's accountable, so sometimes you have to direct. But at the same time, that isn't always the right solution when you want to harness creativity and empower the team to come back with the best solution.
Yeah.
And that's what Alan was saying. Okay, sort the problem out. Here's my expectation. Here's what I'm hoping to see in a week from now, whatever it is. Just go and do what you guys need to do and come back with an answer. That's very empowering.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a different approach.
Yeah, cool. Just I'm conscious that we're probably going to lose the Instagram people after the next question. So move over to LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm going on to you now in 2 seconds. Just move over to LinkedIn if you're on Instagram, and we'll be there for a few more minutes. So we'll get on there at the back. Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a question. So thank you so much for all the feedback, because it's really insightful on the tech, especially environment. I just had this question about, so we've been talking about young leaders, about being transparent, building trust. So I was just wondering, with this company moving really fast and all these great talents empowering the company to grow, how do you differentiate yourself to really have this impact? What have you seen in your experiences as, attitude or behavior that great leaders have?
Start with Martin on that one, maybe.
Yeah, so I think an interesting thing is most startups obviously do want to harness this constructive, creative environment where you can have interdisciplinary people working together. So at a small phase, I think it would be completely incorrect if I was to try to position myself as a manager and you have to follow what I say. Now that might change as things progress and it becomes more operational. So I think you do have to kind of lead by example, and while you might not be the person whacking out the code or the algorithms anymore, you have to show that you find that important and listen to the people doing that and understand their struggles and conflicts and identify any conflicts early. And then on the flip side, you are always looking at people working together constructively and making sure that they're getting satisfaction out of their roles, which isn't easy to do. So it's creating an environment where you have a forum where they can give you that feedback and learn from it. But I do kind of understand that can get more and more challenging the bigger things get.
Yeah.
But that'll be something for me to lead by example, I guess.
So, sorry, if I may just clarify. So my question is more, how do you become a leader? In this moving environment, how do you make the difference to be this person who leads?
Yeah.
Strong view on this one. So there was a great, very, very well published slide deck produced about 10 years ago by Patty McCord out of Netflix, and it was quite hard hitting on culture, and it said, if I paraphrase, that the culture isn't the set of values that are written on posters and left on the walls of buildings, and it gives the example where it wrote up these different words like integrity and so on, and said they're the ones from Enron, I think was on the second slide. But what it did say culture is culture what gets people promoted and what gets people fired. So the answer I would give to you is that the organisation that you're in, what gets rewarded. So there isn't a single answer because it differs by company. So the culture trumps strategy bit that we were talking about earlier on, that's where it actually comes to life. And as an individual, if I were in your shoes and based on my own experience, I first of all detect what that is. What is it that is rewarded in this culture? And after that, decide, is that you? And that brings, so that's tied up a lot of what we were talking about earlier on, because we're saying, you know, if you're in an interview situation, that's the most important thing that you're doing in the interview, is seeing, do I have a fit here? And what the fit is what are the things that are rewarded in this organisation? That's not what's on a performance review sheet or a template or what's said by HR. It's what you detect. You look at the people who have thrived or been fast-tracked through the organisation and you think, are they being fast-tracked because they trample on other people? This is not somewhere I want to be. Or is it because of the fact that that person has great integrity, then I'm going to show great integrity? So figure out what that is and see, is that me? And if you get that match between those two, then you're laughing.
I really agree with that, and I think that's something about that is that when you identify what the leadership roles are in your organisation, and if you authentically aim to embody those characteristics and really learn them through mentorship, through really going above and beyond to learn those characteristics, in my opinion, you'll be a much better leader than if you are interested in the status of becoming a leader or that kind of thing.
Yeah, this is a really good question.
Thank you.
I tell you why, because so many young, and myself as well, I was once young. They don't ask that question of themselves early enough in their career. And I think a really clear example is when you're, and I'm going to get a little philosophical here. So in Taoism, which is one of my favorite philosophies, there's a concept of Wu Wei, which is about going with the flow, right? Now we've all been there. I don't know, like I used to write C++ template code. That's not easy to write. Okay? I don't care. Bring it on. I need parameterized templates in C++ for a hydrographic defense company in Australia, right? So, and it was really complex. We had to build a template library, not write code, write the template library. So that's quite abstract algorithms. But I used to go into work, and I'm literally telling you, about 10, 12 hours would pass before I'd stop to realize. And that's what's called in the flow. It's something that you would almost do for free. I'm not saying go work for free, but and you can find it outside work as well, whatever it is, poetry, painting, or sports. It's just, and this is what a lot of the leaders and motivational speakers often talk about, and there's not enough, it's not getting enough attention, I think, myself. But it's about, it comes back to, Alan was mentioning about the culture, you know, and how you can get into a reward, what's rewarding in the culture. My approach is similar, it's a bit more inward, it's what's your reward? And what is it about the kind of work that you would literally do for free? Find that out first, don't tell anybody, because they're going to want to hire you for peanuts, and you'll do it, I'm joking. But know that about yourself. So like I started in IT as a developer. I moved into project management. I went over to architecture, back over quality assurance, pre-sales, and then I came back and I ended up over maybe a period of maybe a decade realizing it's really strategy and architecture is my core strength. So that's what I'm doing as a full-time consultant. But that stuff that I do, it just comes very naturally to me. I could do it, I love doing it, and it involves different types of skill sets and all that. So my recommendation to young leaders would be, don't leave your, in the flow, if you will, because that's the most rewarding thing about a career. I mean, it's not the paycheck at the end of the day or the pension and stuff. I mean, you're almost equal there. In the field you're in, you can get that anywhere. It's nothing really about that. I might think, the real reward is self-purpose, feeling, and also clarity. Clarity ties in quite well with energized state. So if you're doing something that now I'm not saying your job's going to be nirvana every day, right? But if I was asked, I can do project management work. I'll probably do myself out of consulting roles here. But don't ask me to be a project manager. I can do it, but it won't energize me. It'll demotivate. I'll feel like it's a drag going into work because I don't do all of that tracking and stuff. I can do it, but it doesn't excite me. So knowing that about yourself as early as you can in your career, I think is the most important tip. And then you can bring that back to your organization and say to them, look, could I maybe try, or maybe get a mentor or someone from that area that you maybe think you'd be better fit, or go and do an internship, or move over to there, give it a try. But at least be self-aware that you're in this for yourself. You have to be, because you can work for almost a whole dozen companies you can work for. They're not all going to be the right fit for you. So the only way to do that is to give at least yourself the investment. Invest in yourself. That's, I think, the fastest way to having a career you enjoy.
Good answer there. So we're pretty much at time. But one thing I kind of ask everyone, all the speakers, on the website we have a page where we keep all the recommendations of books, blogs, podcasts and all that kind of thing. So is there any specific podcasts or books or people even that you follow that would be really good that you should follow as well?
So for me, like this is a little bit lame, but I almost treat like podcasts like homework at the moment. Like, so when I was fundraising, I was listening to like The Pitch and that kind of thing, and now I'm trying to learn about sales, so I'm listening to like Sales Gravy, Go Get It Mondays, and they are really educational. But I guess one thing I've found is they all come with a strong, like, I don't know, how do I say it? I can't say it. An American warning, like they're very, very American. So what I actually find much more kind of like useful to learn from is other people. So surrounding myself from people slightly extended beyond my network that you get that click with and you can learn from. So the podcasts are really good information, but I don't think it's as strong as actually learning from people and mentors.
Yeah, I have a list and I'll put them up.
Yeah, cool.
But what I think, it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. When I had been working for about 10 or 15 years and had been leading a team for a while, and I went into strategy consulting. And when I was in strategy consulting, I was doing some work in manufacturing, lean operations in manufacturing, not related to technology at all. I got a copy of The Goal by Ellie Goldratt and started applying that then to how I built technology teams, and I found it useful, and then moved on from there into Don Reinert's product development flow principles. So that's one whole kind of stream of stuff. And what I tend to do now, if somebody's moving from fastest coder in the West into people leadership role, and the struggle that goes when shifting from being rewarded for the fast coding and good coding side to the pretty orthogonal sort of moving into a people leadership role, I normally get them to think about systems thinking, and probably something like the Phoenix project is probably not a bad place to start.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, this is a big one for me because I went through the journey myself. So there's two types of learning, I think, in terms of reading books. You can go depth, which is pretty much within your own field or within tech, and you should always stay up to terms and learn and read books. I have a list of recommendations also, but I would encourage actually, and this is because, and I have a bit of a neuroscience advocate. So 99% of your thoughts today are the same as they were last week, last month, last year. Almost the high volume. So if you're working in tech, the stuff you read, the conversations you have are all within that space. Leadership is about broadening. So one thing I recommend to people is take something you know very little about. I mean, I do this all the time. I mean, I just do it as a personal goal. So I gave a talk a couple of months ago, and I recommended this to people. They were asking for tips on self-empowerment. So every day I go onto YouTube. I have a data bill that kills me. But anyway, I spend a lot of time on there and podcasts. But I choose a topic now I know absolutely nothing about, and I'm not even that interested in it. That's the truth. And I listen to it, and I give it 10 minutes on the dart, whatever. And you wouldn't believe, because what that's actually doing is because often the right brain, left brain side of things, and people think it breaks you right out of your normal train of thought, and this is very powerful. And that's why often if you look at startups, when they get advisory support from Enterprise Ireland, these kind of people, they often bring people from different industries in to help with startups. Because you could be better served having a support team around your, Martin, of people from all different, even people who have different cultures, for sure, that's one thing, but it's actually different mindsets. And so what I recommend is grab a YouTube video. I mean, I only a few days ago listened to a talk about the anatomy of the knee. Right? But you know what you start doing? You start relating that to your metaphors and similes into tech. I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but that's what the brain does. The brain has something called mirror neurons. And what it does is it maps, that's how you get on with people. Did you ever connect with somebody who's from a completely different background? And the reason is because you can often subconsciously you share the same values, but you know, if you talk tech to them, they'll get bored. If they start talking finance to me, I'll be asleep. But often you can get on, that's what they talk about, complementing different types. But that's one thing I recommend is go out there. Now in terms of, so just be cautious of it though. Read the space you're in and learn and constantly challenge new books and look after the trending. But I would say a lot of people do that anyway. I think what I suggest to people that I work with is break right out of that and go broader. And it will help you with things like knowing more. Like the more you know about yourself, the more you know about other people. I mean, no matter how you like it or not, a great techie you might be, to lead and to progress, you have to work with people. And people are so very different.
Yeah. So we're pretty much at time there. So we're going to stick around. There's going to be some pizza, I'm made aware, in there probably, and a few drinks as well. I'd like to thank first of all our speakers. That was really good at last hour. That was brilliant. Thanks to anyone who joined us online, and thanks to Steph and Morgan McKinney.